Alright guys, welcome to Formula 1 News. Ferrari's weekend in Bahrain was their best of the season so far in terms of points scored, and they have more upgrades it seems on the way to try and get them back into contention. They're missing a few tenths of a second to McLaren right now. Their upgrade in Bahrain did improve things, but not enough if they want to be a serious challenger this season. Rumour has it, yes, upgrades are on the way, but the same is also true for other teams up and down the grid. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always, I greatly appreciate it. Starting here, this weekend we go to Jeddah for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, one of the craziest circuits on the calendar, and it looks set to deliver again. 2024 we had the C2, C3, C4 tyres. Pirelli, certainly after what they saw in Suzuka, where there was no tyre deck, have decided pretty much everywhere we are going to go, they're going to try and go a step softer. We saw that work out quite nicely in Bahrain. I think also the fact that it was hot in Bahrain, and that, well, hotter than usual, let's say, because usually Bahrain is earlier in the year. Usually Jeddah is a few weeks earlier in the year, and that's relevant. Few weeks of difference means it's going to be hotter in Jeddah than it usually is. It's going to be hotter in Bahrain. It was hotter in Bahrain than it usually is, which means tyre deg, track temperature becomes even more of an issue. And we got some serious tyre offsets during the Grand Prix in Bahrain, and it made that Grand Prix excellent to watch, even though there wasn't a battle for the win. Hopefully we get a similar thing in Jeddah, but a battle for the win would be nice as well. McLaren's chief contenders around here will probably be Mercedes again, but it is difficult to call. The McLaren's one weakness right now is it is once again quite draggy. In a straight line, it doesn't have the straight line speed of the Ferrari, the Mercedes, or even the Red Bull. It's excellent, but at a circuit like Jeddah, could that potentially be a bit of a downfall where the Mercedes seems planted everywhere it goes? Possibly something to think about. Speaking of Saudi, there is a lot of talk about them getting increasingly involved in F1. They already are. There's talk about 2 Grand Prix when they get Qadiyah built as well over the next few years. We know that they have heavy involvement, at least to some degree, well, Aramco does, with Aston Martin, and there has been a rumour that, okay, well, if Saudi want to get into the sport more so, they could just buy the Aston Martin team. There's now been a bit more talk that it could be actually a separate 12th team. The FIA would be down for this. Maybe the Formula 1 teams wouldn't be, but Saudi can say, look, we'll just pay whatever you want from the Concord Agreement perspective to due to the dilution of the fees. They could probably handle that. So something to think about down the line. Now, yesterday we talked about Max, George, Toto, Mercedes, and all that potential issue right now, because if you guys didn't see yesterday's video, rumour has it, if Max is lower than 3rd in the Drivers' Championship around about the summer break, he is able to leave that contract, no questions asked. And if Max could choose a team to join, I mean, I guess you'd choose McLaren, right? But because they've got the best car right now. But next year, maybe Mercedes are going to be the team to beat again. There's obviously loads to talk about their engine. So it would obviously be a conversation. There were rumours that Jos Verstappen, Max's father, had had deep conversations with Toto, and that was a likely possibility at some point in the future. But George has been so good so far this year that maybe Toto's going to say, you know what, even if Max was available, maybe, he is better than George. But George is a statesman on some level. I didn't really mention this yesterday, but I think I kind of hinted at it. Max carries some level of risk. Sure, you bring him in and he's just an unbelievably talented driver, but he brings an entourage, and we know that when Max isn't very happy with the team, he lets it be very clear that he's not happy with the team. George is very Mercedes. Like, George sums up Mercedes very well in terms of their personality as a team. George can get screwed by strategy, his car can break down, something horrific can happen. I mean, even this weekend he was having all sorts of issues and his car was about to turn off. Can you imagine Max on the radio if they'd have told him, yeah, look mate, your DRS isn't working because the transponders failed, your steering wheel's probably about to turn off, and George is on the radio saying, oh well, as long as it doesn't fall off, and then he gets on with it and ends up delivering a great performance. Not to say that Max wouldn't also have been able to deliver the great performance, but I would suspect Max may have had some more colourful words on the radio. So I think there's a reason why Toto, with the way that George is currently driving, feels like maybe we just stick it out with this pairing, Russell and Antonelli, for next year. And reportedly, this is potentially near enough a done deal. Rumour had it yesterday, last night anyway, that he's going to get a 2-year extension, potentially a 2+1 deal, with a $30 million per season agreement, which is pretty mega, and would probably be justified on recent performances. But as we've said yesterday, if Max is going to be able to leave, that won't become clear until at least a few rounds further down the line. At which point maybe the deal is done with Russell and there's just no way that they're getting rid of Antonelli. I mean, even if Antonelli wasn't performing very well this season, I still think there's no way they would be getting rid of him. And he actually is performing really well and is one of the drivers of the season so far. So, you know, signs definitely point towards Mercedes sticking it out for next year. Russell, I mean, I mentioned it yesterday, has probably been the driver of the season so far. Certainly George and Max, I would say, are the two in that conversation. I mean, there's many others. Obviously, Oscar's not far behind, but he had a difficult time back in Australia. And in quali, in sprint quali, race quali, whatever, George has been bare minimum 5th in every scenario, which is a real excellent start to the season for him. And I think you could very much argue that in Bahrain he was driver of the day. Qualified second, but started third, got back to second in the Grand Prix, dealt with so many issues throughout that race and still managed to fend off Lando at the end with a car that was failing underneath him and ended up finishing second in the Grand Prix. I think Mercedes saw that and were like, yeah, this guy's mega, we've got to keep him around. But as Brundle said, and I obviously discussed yesterday too, if Max is on the marketplace, then is there realistically a safe seat in the sport? That discussion will go on. One seat which is not safe, but is maybe slightly more secure than it previously was, is Jack Doohan's. This is a pretty big update actually that the race give, that Doohan has been good enough so far this year with respect to expectations and with respect to Gasly that they will give him some more time. There was a rumour that Doohan had effectively 6 Grand Prix and then he was going to get kicked out for Colapinto. Let's not forget, by the way, Colapinto has, well, they paid a lot of money to Williams to get Colapinto into Alpine. Colapinto's sponsors are paying big money for him to be part of Alpine. So there will be a push, let's be real, to get Colapinto that drive. But maybe in the simulator, Colapinto's not been especially spectacular. And Doohan, despite, I mean, a very tricky start. In Melbourne, spun on the first lap, Suzuka into the wall. But apart from that, here in Bahrain, it was a pretty solid weekend. If not for the safety car getting stuck on the hards, he may have even scored some points, as Gasly did, and in quali pace and everything else, Doohan's not been that far off Gasly. He's been within enough of a tolerance, I would say, for Alpine to say, okay, we're going to give you a little bit longer. And I think this is justified. I think it's nice to see that he's at least going to get a little bit more of a runway, and instead of 6 Grand Prix, which would be this weekend in Saudi, and the following, I think it goes to Miami after this, he will get probably until the summer break. Maybe then Colapinto gets the drive anyway, we'll see, but Doohan's going to have a bit more time, we think, to prove his worth on this team. And let's talk about Ferrari, because they, as I said at the start of the video, actually had a good weekend with respect to their previous weekends. But unfortunately for them, of course, still nowhere near good enough. And if they actually want to be a contender in this year's championship, either of them, they've got to get quick and get quick fast. Within the next few rounds, they've really got to start becoming a race-winning capable car, because otherwise it's simply not going to happen. Hamilton, of course, was frustrated with his own performance in qualifying, and after the race, though, he was a bit more upbeat and basically said he learned so much in Bahrain about the way this car, you know, wants to be handled. What he said was very interesting was about the brakes. So over the last 15 years, he's used Carbon Industries brakes, which manufacture the brakes for Mercedes. He's now using Brembo. And I think when he first joined Mercedes, they used Brembo engines, and then he changed away to Carbon Industries. And, well, they just have different characteristics. There's a feeling that Hamilton can't brake as late as he wants to. Charles Leclerc brakes a bit earlier, and that seems to give the car a bit better rotation, and just maybe it's also partially these ground effect era cars as well. But Hamilton says that it requires such a different driving style and settings. I've been using engine braking, which I've never ever used in previous years. Much different brakes if you're on Brembos, and I've been on Carbon Industries for the last 15 years or so. Requires a much different driving style, so I'm adjusting to that, and I'm slowly getting it into my head, getting the balance right. What's clear is that Charles starts with this setup and he stays with it pretty much all weekends, and I was a long way away from him. I've got to do a better job. Obviously, Hamilton can put it together. We saw that in China. But in China, they were running their car very close to the ground. And that was okay for the sprints. They got away with it because there wasn't going to be the wear on the plank. But for the full Grand Prix, there was. And we know how that ended, of course. The issue is for Ferrari is that if the rumour is true, that they are losing roughly 20 points of downforce because they can't run their car at the right heights they want to. That probably equates to the difference right now between McLaren and Ferrari. Their simulators told them that they could run the car at this right height and they would be on par with McLaren, or at least where they want to be. That is not how it is so far this season, and that is the primary issue. Whether they have an upgrade that can resolve that issue, that is the main thing they've got to try and figure out. The race, maybe though, for Ferrari could have actually been better. The pit stops were class again. They've had the best pit stop team so far this season, Ferrari, by a mile, actually. Red Bull have surprisingly fallen off somewhat. McLaren are good, but not great. Ferrari are doing a killer job with it, and their strategy was also pretty good in the end. Obviously, they elected not to go for the hard, so Leclerc wanted to go for the one stop, but they decided that no, medium, soft was going to be the way to go. And to be honest, that would have been a fire strategy. I'd have loved to have seen how that would have played out. Of course, in the end, the safety car kind of, as Vasseur says, spoiled our plans. But could you imagine if the rest of the grid went on to mediums at the end, which they were largely planning to do? It was very much so a soft, medium strategy for the rest. Ferrari went for this medium, soft strategy. And given their pace advantage on the mediums in that middle stint, imagine on low fuel, soft tyres at the ends, they probably would have been rapid. You know, a podium may have been on the cards. In the end, 4th, 5th was realistically the best they could possibly do. So there was a feeling from Ferrari that things are maybe getting a little bit better. They brought an upgrade the most recent weekends. Vasseur says that the struggles are nothing to do with the new concept. It's purely that they have no grip and downforce. But obviously that could be something to do with the new concept, one might well argue. But Ferrari still lags McLaren by up to 4 tenths per lap. And we'll see in a second exactly where some of that delta seems to be coming from. So the guys at Auto Racer put together an article talking about the upgrades they brought to Bahrain and the upgrades they still have to come going forwards. So the package in Bahrain gave them, we believe, a tenth of a second, which obviously is not much, right? Like, they brought the new floor and it's given them a tenth. Now, in recent years, that may have been bigger, but as we know, these teams are reaching the ceiling of what's possible in these regulations, so even unlocking a tenth is, it's at least something. But when McLaren are still 4 tenths further up the road, it's not really doing all that much. The positive that Ferrari do have is that they can optimize the package. You often see this, certainly with Ferrari, you often see this. They'll bring an upgrade package, it will work, but it won't be optimized. And they will then trawl over the data over the next few days, and they will then, for the next Grand Prix, almost get like another pseudo upgrade. Maybe they only delivered half of the potential of the upgrade last weekend, and they can do so again. So let's say that's what Ferrari manage, and there's actually maybe 2 tenths in the upgrade, but they only extracted a tenth from the upgrade. Hypothetically, maybe they'll benefit more from that in Jeddah, which of course would be a big circuit to try and capitalise on, and one where, 2022, Charles Leclerc certainly went rather well. In Sakir, there was also a new rear brake duct, new internal duct, no need to declare it though, because it's not like aerodynamic bodywork changes on the car. While for Jeddah, a rear wing change is expected, so they're probably going to have a lower downforce rear wing or something special for the Jeddah circuit, which will obviously require different compromises in terms of setting up to make sure you've still got the speed on the straight. This, though, was the pretty interesting part of the article towards the bottom here. So they talk about McLaren and they talk about Red Bull and the other teams too. They mention why Mercedes might be a factor. But this is pretty interesting. So the Ferrari came to life on the medium tyres. Leclerc in the middle stint was a tenth and a half faster than Piastri. The new floor gave them something close to a tenth of performance, which is 5 points of downforce. So that rumour that they're losing 20 points of downforce because they can't run the car at the right height they want, that's where your 4 tenths come from if you extrapolate some of that data. Point of downforce is a very precarious terminology, really. No one's exactly sure what it, well, people know what it refers to, but exactly what it translates to in terms of lap time is still a bit of a grey area, really. But this is the interesting part. In Maranello, the engineers are slowly solving the puzzle, while a faulty supply related to the gearbox has been discovered and solved. Maybe that was the issue that was costing Hamilton a tenth a lap. That's certainly what he said. That was an issue down there after the Suzuka Grand Prix. So it seems like they've solved that issue. Sarah's pushing the aerodynamics. it is expected there will be a big package later. And we've mentioned the other profile changes they're making for the upcoming races. But this is the big update today, really, is that there is going to be an extensive update at some point. Now, when is that? How soon is that upgrade set to arrive? Because they've brought a new floor, they've got a couple of other things in the works as well, but the rumour has it today that they're not necessarily going to bring these upgrades at Imola. Imola is the race where we are expecting it to arrive for Red Bull, right? They're expecting to bring a big upgrade there that's going to make a substantial amount of difference. Ferrari are not planning it for Imola, but possibly Barcelona. That tends to be a circuit that teams will bring substantial upgrades. Of course, that's on a weekend where the flexi-wing clampdown comes into effect, and that could be a very fascinating reset of the season, especially if that's when Ferrari's big package is set to arrive, because this floor change was significant, sure, but not considered to be a big package, a substantial aerodynamic change. That is coming. It will arrive at some point, potentially at Barcelona. That's the talking point. Some track-specific tweaks for Monaco as well, which I think ends up being between those two Grand Prix. So that's where Ferrari sit right now. But as I say, it's not like the other teams are standing still. We haven't heard much on what McLaren are planning to do. Maybe McLaren are feeling very confident that they've got this title sewn up and, you know, they can think a lot about 2026. I don't think they will be feeling that way for a very long time. And Ferrari also have to ride that line too. When do they give up on this year and focus on next year? Because that's the big rumour, really, that Ferrari are going to give it a big go, maybe around Barcelona, bring one big upgrade package, and who knows, if it works spectacularly and they start winning races, maybe they still commit more resources to this year's car. But if it doesn't work, or after that upgrade, I think many teams will likely switch almost all of their focus to the 2026 regulations, which puts McLaren in a pretty promising position. But also, if McLaren say, oh, well, we're looking great, let's just divert the resources, and all of a sudden you get a big upgrade from Ferrari or from some other team, then it muddies the water. I think the team that I'm most excited about is Mercedes, because we talked about them in the off-season having chosen a concept that seemed, I wouldn't say risk-free, but there was definitely a feeling that Mercedes were taking less risks than other teams. But they were of the belief that they could build this year a stable aerodynamic platform, which they have now done. It's a stable aero platform, there's no doubt about that, and the Mercedes is very consistent, and it's really fast, only behind the McLaren in recent pace performance. So with that in mind, if they could just add downforce, obviously it's easier said than done, but if they could just add downforce, then they'd be in a good spot. And I think there's definitely a world where Mercedes bring like a big upgrade that gives them a couple of tenths, and all of a sudden they're right there on certain weekends. Beating McLaren is going to be a real challenge, but at least for George to challenge and be in the mix more consistently, like he was in Bahrain, is absolutely possible. And it's apparently Imola that they have a major upgrade on the way, and then they're really going to just focus on 2026 basically. So they're going to improve the W16 to such an extent that they can, and then they're going to think about next year. So that's the issue for Ferrari. Maybe they have some upgrades in the works, but if Mercedes are bringing packages, obviously we know that Red Bull also at Imola have some things in the works too. There's great urgency for upgrades at Red Bull with Marco's future and, well, therefore Verstappen's future definitely on the line as it stands. But very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Just one final interesting thing. This time last year, these were the point standings. Red Bull had scored 141 points, Ferrari had scored 120 points, and McLaren had only scored 69. This year, a very different story. McLaren have 151, Mercedes are at 93, way better than their car was last year. Red Bull have less than half, actually no, not quite less than half. They have half, of, basically, of last year's points number. Ferrari have substantially less than half. But the interesting thing to note in this graphic is that every team has scored points. This time last year, Williams had no points until the 8th round, Alpine had 0 points until the 6th round, and Sauber had 0 points until the 23rd round, where Joe scored some points in Qatar. This season, though, every team has scored points. I mean, Alpine didn't score any until this past weekends, but it's pretty cool to see that's happened. I mean, Aston Martin are not good, but Stroll's managed to score 10 points for them so far this season. Haas are having an absolute mind-blowing start to the season for them, certainly with how bad Melbourne was. They've turned it around big time, and Williams, especially with Alex Albon, I mean, cooking too. So, look, it's a competitive grid. I think my comment would be enjoy it while it lasts, because next year we are going to have more performance discrepancy than this. There is no doubt in my mind about that. And there will be teams next year team anyway, and probably teams that don't score any points. I think it's absolutely possible next season. But very much interested to your thoughts on all of this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.